The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers opened with a deep hum that could be felt in the bones. Taijin walked through them for the first time, his eyes wide as he took in the sight before him. The chamber was huge, bigger than any building he had seen on Earth. The ceiling stretched so high that it disappeared into darkness above. Hundreds of seats filled the circular room, each one designed for a different alien species. Some seats looked like giant crystals for the rock-like beings. Others were filled with glowing gas for creatures made of pure energy. Water-filled tanks held the fish-like delegates, while some seats floated in the air for species that had no solid bodies at all. At the center of it all sat a simple wooden desk. Behind it, a human man in black robes was reading from a thick book. Judge Hyunwoo looked small compared to the giants around him, but something about the way he sat made him seem like the most important person in the room. Tae-jin found his seat in the human section and sat down carefully. He was new to his job as a legal clerk, and this was his first time watching a real trial. His supervisor had told him to pay attention and learn, but she had not explained why humans were always the ones who made the final decisions. The Council will now hear the case of the Crystalline Empire versus the Flux Collective, Judge Hyunwoo said in a calm voice. His words were translated into hundreds of languages instantly by the machines built into every seat. A creature that looked like a walking mountain of blue crystal stood up. Its voice sounded like rocks grinding together. Honored Judge, we bring serious charges against the Flux beings. They have poisoned our sacred breeding grounds with their energy waste. 3 generations of our children have been born sick because of their carelessness. The crystal being's words created a low rumble of angry sounds from others of its kind. Their bodies glowed brighter as they got upset, filling their section with harsh blue light. From across the chamber, something that looked like a small storm cloud floated upward. When it spoke, its voice was like wind whistling through caves. The Crystalline Empire lies, Judge. We have done nothing wrong. Our energy flows are natural and clean. If their children are sick, it is because they chose to build their nests too close to our feeding areas. The storm creature's words made other energy beings spark and flash with anger. The air around them began to smell like lightning was about to strike. Order, Judge Hyunwoo said quietly, but somehow everyone heard him. The angry sound stopped immediately. Both sides will present their evidence calmly, or this court will find them in contempt. Tae-jin watched in amazement as the two groups settled down. He had read about trials in school, but seeing one was very different. The hate between these two species was obvious. They had been fighting over the same star systems for hundreds of years. The crystal being continued its story. For 50 years we have asked them to move their feeding grounds. They refuse. They say we should move our breeding sites, but those caves have been sacred to us for thousands of years. Our ancestors are buried there. We cannot simply leave. Other species began to take sides. The rock-like beings supported the crystals. The gas creatures backed the energy beings. Soon, half the chamber was arguing with the other half. The noise grew louder and louder. Judge Hyunwoo did not raise his voice. He did not bang his gavel. He simply sat quietly and watched. Tae-jin wondered why he was not stopping the chaos. Then something strange happened. One by one, the aliens began to notice the judge's silence. They started to quiet down, as if his calm was spreading through the room like ripples in water. Within minutes, the chamber was silent again. Are you finished? Judge Hyunwoo asked. His tone was not angry or annoyed. It was simply curious, as if he really wanted to know. The crystal being's glow dimmed with embarrassment. Yes, honored judge. Good. Now let me understand this correctly. The Crystalline Empire claims their children are being harmed by energy waste from flux feeding areas. The Flux Collective claims their feeding is natural and that the crystals chose to build too close. Is this accurate? Both sides agreed that this was correct. Judge Hyunwoo nodded slowly. I see. And how long have both of your species lived in this star system? The crystals have been there for 3,000 years, the crystal being said proudly. We have fed in those energy fields for 10,000 years, the storm creature replied. Interesting, the judge said. And when did the Crystalline Empire first notice problems with their children? 50 years ago, the crystal answered. And what happened 50 years ago that might have changed things? The chamber fell silent. Tae-jin could see both sides thinking hard about the question. He realized that the judge was not just listening to their arguments. He was digging deeper, looking for something they had not thought about. The storm creature suddenly flickered with surprise. The solar flares, it whispered. What solar flares? Judge Hyun-woo asked gently. 50 years ago, the star began having more solar flares. We had to change how we feed to protect ourselves from the radiation. We had to process more energy than before. The crystal being turned toward the energy creature. For the first time, it did not look angry. It looked confused. You never told us about the solar flares. We did not think it mattered, the storm creature said. We were still feeding in the same places. Judge Hyun-woo leaned forward slightly. But you were processing more energy to protect yourselves, which created more waste. And the crystals did not know why their children were suddenly getting sick, so they blamed you for being careless. Both creatures stared at the judge. Around the chamber, other aliens were nodding slowly as they understood what had really happened. So, neither side was lying, the judge continued. The crystals are right that the energy waste is hurting their children. The flux are right that they are not being careless on purpose. You are both suffering because of the solar flares, and you have been fighting each other instead of working together to solve the real problem. Tae-jin felt a chill run down his spine. In just a few questions, Judge Hyun-woo had found the truth that both sides had missed. He had not taken either side. He had not gotten angry or picked favorites. He had simply looked at the facts until he found what was really happening. The trial continued for several more hours, but the angry fighting was over. Both sides worked with the judge to find a solution that would protect the crystal children, while letting the energy beings continue to feed safely. As the court session ended and the aliens began to file out, Tae-jin sat in his chair thinking. He had watched representatives from dozens of different species, some of them far older and smarter than any human. But they had all waited quietly for Judge Hyun-woo to make the final decision. They had all accepted his authority without question. Why? What made humans special enough to judge the conflicts of the entire galaxy? Tae-jin decided he had to find out. Tae-jin could not stop thinking about what he had seen in the courtroom. 3 days had passed since the trial, but the questions kept spinning in his mind. Why did every alien species accept human judges without argument? What made humans so special? He decided to find answers. The council archives were located deep underground beneath the main chambers. Tae-jin had heard they contained records going back thousands of years, from when the first alien species met and formed the Galactic Council. If there were answers to his questions, they would be there. The archive entrance was guarded by a tall, thin robot that scanned Tae-jin's identification card. Purpose of visit? The machine asked in a flat voice. Research for legal case preparation, Tae-jin replied. It was not exactly a lie. He was researching legal matters, even if it was for his own curiosity rather than an official case. The robot's eyes flashed green. Access granted to public records. Level 1 clearance only. The archive room was enormous, filled with millions of data storage units that hummed quietly in the dim light. Tae-jin sat down at a computer terminal and began his search. He typed, in simple terms at first, human judges, galactic law, council authority. The results were disappointing. Most of the records just stated facts without explaining reasons. Human judges appointed to all council disputes in year 2298. Judge appointment procedures established. Judicial authority transferred to human oversight. But none of them said why. After 2 hours of frustrating searching, Tae-jin heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see a young woman approaching his table, carrying a stack of old books. You look frustrated, she said with a smile. I am so young. I work here as a xenohistorian. Are you having trouble finding something? Tae-jin explained what he was looking for. So Young's eyes lit up with interest. That is a great question, she said. I have wondered about it myself. The official records do not explain much, do they? But there are older records, ones that most people do not know about. Would you like help looking? Tae-jin nodded eagerly. So Young led him to a different section of the archives, where the storage units looked much older. These contain records from before the modern council system, she explained. Back when things were very different. She helped him search through files that were hundreds of years old. The language was harder to understand and many records were incomplete. But slowly a picture began to form. Look at this, So Young said, pointing to an old document on her screen. This is from 2156. It says here that a council trial took 3 years to finish because the judges could not agree on what justice meant. Tai Jin read over her shoulder. The case was about trade disputes between 5 different species. Each judge had ruled based on their own species' ideas of fairness. The insect-like judges thought the group was more important than individuals. The predator species judges believed the strongest should win. The energy beings thought physical property did not matter. They never finished the case, So Young continued. It just says trial suspended indefinitely due to judicial incompatibility. They found more examples. Dozens of them. Cases that took years or were never finished at all. Some trials had ended in violence when different species could not agree on basic ideas of right and wrong. Here is something interesting, Taejin said, pointing to another file. This mentions something called the Great Stagnation. Have you heard of that? So Young shook her head. They searched for more information about this strange period. What they found was disturbing. For over 150 years, the Galactic Council had barely functioned. Trade between species dropped to almost nothing, because no one could resolve disputes fairly. Wars broke out regularly. Some species stopped talking to others completely. It says here that many species considered leaving the Council. So Young read aloud. Some thought galactic civilization was going to collapse. As they dug deeper, they found references to something called the Terran Solution. Every time it was mentioned, the records became more excited and hopeful. But the details were missing. These files are incomplete, So Young said with frustration. Someone has removed information. Or maybe it is classified at a higher level. They were about to give up when another person joined them. A tall man with graying hair had been listening to their conversation. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I could not help but overhear. Are you researching judicial history? I am Dong Hyun. I used to be a military officer, but now I work in legal research." Tai Jin and So Young explained what they were looking for. Dong Hyun nodded thoughtfully. "I have seen references to the Terran Solution in military files," he said. "But like you, I could never find the complete story. However, I know someone who might be able to help us. There is an old man named Jin Ho who works in the deep archives. He has been here longer than anyone else. If anyone knows the truth, it would be him." The three of them made their way to the deepest level of the archives. The air was colder here and the lights were dimmer. They found Jin Ho in a small office, surrounded by ancient books and data crystals. He was very old, with white hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes, but when they explained what they were looking for, his eyes became sharp and alert. "The Terran Solution," he said slowly. "I have not heard anyone ask about that in many years. Why do you want to know?" Taejin told him about the trial he had witnessed and how he could not understand why humans had such special authority. Jin Ho was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "What you are asking about is not just history. It is the foundation of everything we have built. But the full truth is not in these public records. It is classified at the highest levels." "Why?" So Young asked. "Because it reveals something that some species would rather forget," Jin Ho replied. "The story of how humans became judges is not a story of humans being chosen because they were perfect. It is a story of every other species failing so badly that they had no choice but to try something different." He looked at each of them carefully. "If you really want to know the truth, I can help you access the classified records. But you must understand that what you learn might change how you see everything. Are you sure you want to continue?" Taejin thought about Judge Hyunwoo sitting calmly in that huge chamber, somehow bringing peace to species that had been fighting for centuries. He thought about all the trials that had failed during the Great Stagnation and all the wars that had resulted. "Yes," he said firmly, "I need to know." So Young and Dong Hyun nodded in agreement. Jin Ho smiled sadly. Very well. But first you must understand one thing. The story you are about to learn is not about human superiority. It is about human necessity. There is a difference, and it is important. He stood up slowly and walked to a wall safe that Tae-jin had not noticed before. After entering a long code, the safe opened to reveal a single data crystal. This contains the complete records of Council versus Reality, Jin-ho said. The trial that changed everything. The trial that made humans the judges of the galaxy. He handed the crystal to Tae-jin. But before you read this, you should know that once you understand the truth, you will carry a burden. You will know why the peace we have now is so fragile, and why it depends on humans continuing to do something that no other species can do. Tae-jin took the crystal. It was warm in his hand, as if it contained something alive. What is it that humans can do? He asked. Jin-ho's smile was both proud and sad. Humans can be wrong, he said, and they can admit it. That might not sound like much, but in a galaxy full of species who cannot change their minds, it is everything. The data crystal felt heavy in Tae-jin's hands as the four of them gathered around Jin-ho's private computer terminal. The old man inserted the crystal carefully, as if it contained something dangerous. Before we begin, Jin-ho said softly, I should tell you that I was there. I was young then, working as a translator when humans first made contact with the Council. What you are about to see changed my life. The screen flickered to life, showing the Council chambers from over a century ago. They looked different then, smaller with fewer species represented. The mood in the recording was tense and angry. This is from the year 2298, Jin-ho explained. The Council had been paralyzed for months by a case that seemed impossible to solve. 7 different species were involved in a trade dispute, but every judge who tried to handle it made things worse. Tae-jin watched as the recording showed various alien judges attempting to preside over the trial. Each one interpreted the law through their own species' point of view, making decisions that satisfied their own kind, but outraged the others. A judge from the hive-minded collective species ruled that individual property rights did not matter, only what was good for the group. The individual traders from other species were furious. A predator species judge declared that the strongest trader should take everything, which made the smaller, peaceful species threaten to leave the Council entirely. An energy being judge said that physical objects had no real value, so the dispute was meaningless. The material-based species were insulted. It went on like this for months, Jin-ho said. Every time a new judge tried to solve the case, they made it worse. Some species were talking about war. Others were preparing to leave the Council forever. What, about human judges? So Young asked. Were there any back then? Jin-ho shook his head. Humans were not even members of the Council yet. We had just been discovered and were being studied to see if we were civilized enough to join. Most species thought we were too primitive and violent. The recording showed heated arguments in the Council chambers. Species that had been allies for centuries were turning against each other. The entire galactic civilization was falling apart over one impossible case. Then something unexpected happened, Jin-ho continued. He fast-forwarded the recording to a new scene. The human contact team was invited to observe the proceedings as part of their evaluation for Council membership. Tae-jin saw a group of humans in simple uniforms sitting in a small section marked Observers. They looked tiny and out of place among the massive alien delegates. The leader of the human team was Captain Min-ho, Jin-ho said, pointing to a man with kind eyes and graying hair. He was a diplomat, not a lawyer. He was just supposed to watch and learn about galactic law. The recording showed the trial continuing its downward spiral. Another judge, this time from a machine intelligence species, tried to solve the case using pure logic. The decision was mathematically perfect but completely ignored the emotional and cultural needs of the organic species involved. The chamber erupted in chaos. Species began shouting at each other in languages the translators could not keep up with. Some delegates stormed out, others made threatening gestures. Then Captain Min-ho stood up. "Excuse me," he said in a calm voice. The translators picked up his words and broadcast them throughout the chamber. "I know I am just an observer, but may I ask a question?" The chaos slowly died down. The aliens turned to look at this small human who had dared to speak. I have been listening to this case for weeks, Minho continued. I think I understand the problem, but I want to make sure. May I ask each side to explain what they really want, not what they think they deserve? According to law? The presiding judge, a crystal being who looked exhausted, nodded. Very well, though I do not see how this will help. One by one, each species explained their real concerns. The individual traders wanted security for their families. The group-minded species wanted to make sure trade benefits were shared fairly. The predator species wanted respect for their strength. The energy beings wanted acknowledgement that their contributions mattered, even if they were not physical. Captain Minho listened to all of them without interrupting. When they were finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I think I see the problem, he said finally. You are all right. The chamber fell silent. You are all right, Minho repeated. But you are asking for things that seem to contradict each other. The individual traders deserve security, and the group species deserve fair sharing. The predator species deserve respect, and the energy beings deserve recognition. The problem is not that anyone is wrong. The problem is that you are trying to solve 7 different problems with one solution. He walked to the center of the chamber, looking small but somehow commanding attention. What if we tried a different approach, he suggested. What if instead of one big solution we created several smaller ones? Individual traders could get security through insurance pools funded by group species. Predator species could get respect by being honored as protectors of trade routes. Energy beings could get recognition by having their contributions officially recorded and celebrated. The aliens stared at him. The idea was so simple that no one had thought of it. But that would be more complicated, the crystal judge protested. Yes, Minho agreed. It would be more work. But it would also mean everyone gets what they actually need instead of what the law says they should want. Jinho paused the recording. This was the moment everything changed, he said quietly. Captain Minho did something that no alien judge had been able to do. He looked past the legal arguments to see what people really needed. But that seems obvious, Taejin said. Why could the alien judges not see it? Because they could not. Think outside their own species' programming, Donghyun answered. Each species evolves to think in certain ways. Hive minds always think about groups. Predators always think about dominance. Energy beings always think about abstracts. They cannot help it. Jinho nodded. But humans evolved differently. Earth's history was full of conflict and change. Humans had to learn to understand enemies who thought completely differently from them. They had to learn to change their own minds when they were wrong. The recording continued. Captain Minho's solution worked perfectly. Within days, the 7 species had agreed to a complex but fair arrangement that satisfied everyone's real needs. But then something even more remarkable happened. The council asked Captain Minho to judge another case, Jinho said. Then another. Then another. Every time he found solutions that the alien judges had missed. The recording showed case after case where Minho succeeded where others had failed. But the most important moment came when a case involved humans directly. A human trading company was accused of cheating an alien partner. The evidence was clear. The humans had broken their contract. According to galactic law, they should be punished severely. This is the moment that convinced the council, Jinho said. Watch carefully. Captain Minho reviewed the evidence thoroughly. Then he ruled against the human company, ordering them to pay damages and face criminal charges. The chamber was stunned. The human judge had ruled against his own species. Why? The crystal judge asked. Why would you punish your own people? Minho looked directly at the camera. Because they were wrong, he said simply. Being human does not make them right. My job is to find the truth, not to protect humans. Jinho stopped the recording. That was the day the council realized that humans had something unique. They could recognize their own mistakes and overcome their own biases. No other species had ever demonstrated that ability. So they made humans the judges of everything? So Young asked. Not immediately, Jinho replied. First, they tested more humans. They found that while not all humans were equally good at judging, all humans had the basic ability to question their own assumptions. It was built into their psychology by millions of years of surviving change. Tae-jin thought about what he had learned. So humans are not the judges because we are smarter or better than other species? No, Jin-ho said firmly. Humans are judges because they are the only species that can truly be impartial. Every other species is limited by their evolutionary psychology. They cannot help but see the universe through their own filters. But humans have biases too, Dong-hyun pointed out. Jin-ho smiled. Yes, they do, but they also have something unique, the ability to recognize those biases and work around them. That is what makes them suitable judges. Not perfection, but self-awareness. Tae-jin looked at the dark screen where the recording had played. Is that why other species accept human authority? Because they know they cannot be truly fair themselves? Exactly, Jin-ho said. It is not that they respect humans more than other species. It is that they respect human judgment more than their own. They know that when a human judge makes a decision, it is based on evidence and logic, not on what benefits humans. But what if humans lose this ability? So Young asked. What if they become like other species, unable to change their minds? Jin-ho's expression became serious. That is the greatest fear of the Council. If humans ever lose their capacity for self-correction, galactic civilization will return to the chaos of the Great Stagnation. That is why human judges are carefully selected and trained. That is why the position carries so much responsibility. 2 weeks had passed since Tae-jin learned the truth about human judges. He tried to return to his normal work, but everything felt different now. When he watched Judge Hyun-woo in court, he saw not just a man making decisions, but the keystone, holding galactic civilization together. Then the emergency alarm sounded. The high-pitched wail echoed through the council building, a sound that had not been heard in over 50 years. Tae-jin dropped his files and ran toward the main chambers along with hundreds of other workers. The massive chamber was filled with panicked voices speaking in dozens of languages. Delegates from every species were shouting questions at once. At the center of the chaos, Counselor Woo Jin stood at the main podium trying to restore order. Please, delegates, please, Woo Jin called out. We must remain calm while we address this crisis. Calm? Screeched a delegate from the bird-like Talon species. An entire star system has been destroyed. Billions of lives are gone. Tae-jin felt his blood turn cold. A destroyed star system meant catastrophe on an unimaginable scale. Counselor Woo Jin activated the main display screen. Images appeared showing what had once been the Kepler 442 system. Where 3 populated planets had orbited their star, there was now only empty space and scattered debris. The Void Fleet has consumed everything, Woo Jin announced. Planets, moons, space stations, and all life within the system. They left nothing behind. A wave of angry roars and fearful cries swept through the chamber. The Void Fleet was a nomadic species that survived by consuming matter and converting it to energy. They usually fed on empty asteroids and dead worlds, but this was different. This is an act of war, shouted a delegate from the Machine Intelligence Collective. They have violated every treaty and law. We demand justice, added a representative of the crystal beings. The Void Fleet must be stopped before they consume another system. More voices joined the outcry. Some species called for immediate military action. Others demanded that the Void Fleet be expelled from the galaxy entirely. Counselor Woo Jin raised his hands for silence. A trial will be held to determine the facts and decide on appropriate action. As always, a human judge will preside over the proceedings. Where is Judge Hyun-woo? Called out someone from the crowd. Judge Hyun-woo is on assignment in the Outer Rim and cannot return for several weeks, Woo Jin replied. Judge Min-jung is dealing with the Centauri trade wars. Judge Subin is investigating the artificial intelligence uprising in the Vega sector. An uncomfortable murmur spread through the chamber. It was unusual for all the senior judges to be away at the same time. What about Judge Kyung-soo? Asked another delegate. Judge Kyung-soo has taken ill with a rare condition that affects only humans, Woo Jin said. Our medical teams are working to treat him, but he is unable to perform his duties. The murmur grew louder and more worried. Taijin felt a chill of suspicion. It seemed too convenient that all the human judges were suddenly unavailable. "There are other human judges," called out a delegate. "The junior judges lack the experience to handle a case of this magnitude," Wu Jin replied. "However, we cannot wait weeks for a senior judge to return. Every day of delay risks more systems being consumed." Counselor Wu Jin paused, looking uncomfortable. "Therefore, the council has voted to temporarily suspend the human judge requirement. This case will be heard by a panel of 3 non-human judges." The chamber exploded in shocked silence, then erupted in arguments. This had never happened before. For over a century, every major case had been decided by human judges. "This is unprecedented," protested the crystal delegate. "It is necessary," Wu Jin insisted. "The alternative is to let the Void Fleet continue destroying systems while we wait for human judges to become available." Taijin watched the delegates debate, but his mind was racing. Something was wrong. He thought about what Jin Ho had told him about the classified nature of human judicial authority. Someone was testing whether the system could work without humans. The vote was close, but the emergency nature of the situation won out. The trial would proceed with non-human judges. The next day, the trial began. Taijin sat in the observer section, watching 3 alien judges take their positions where Judge Hyun-woo usually sat. The first judge was a member of the crystal species, chosen for their logical thinking. The second was from the Machine Intelligence Collective, selected for their ability to process vast amounts of data. The third was an energy being, included to represent the non-physical species. The prosecution presented their case against the Void Fleet. The evidence was clear and terrible. Sensor recordings showed the massive ships of the Void Fleet systematically consuming every piece of matter in the Kepler 442 system. 3 billion people had died in the process. "The crime is obvious," stated the prosecutor, a tall insect-like being. "The Void Fleet has committed genocide on an unprecedented scale. They must be punished with the full force of galactic law." The crystal judge nodded approvingly. "The evidence is clear. The defendants are guilty of mass murder." But then, the Void Fleet representative was brought forward. The being was massive, dark as space itself, with eyes like dying stars. When it spoke, its voice was like the sound of worlds ending. "We did not murder," it said simply. "We fed." "You destroyed 3 planets full of life," the insect prosecutor accused. "Yes," the Void Fleet being replied without emotion. "We consumed matter to survive. This is our nature." The machine intelligence judge processed this response. "The defendant admits to the destruction but claims it was not murder. Please explain the distinction." "We were dying," the Void Fleet representative said. "Our people had not fed in months. Our children were starving. We found the system and fed to survive. This is not murder. This is eating." The energy being judge flickered with confusion. "But you could have fed on uninhabited worlds. Why choose populated planets?" "There were no uninhabited worlds available," the Void Fleet being replied. "We searched for empty systems but found none in time. Our children were dying. We had to choose between our survival and theirs." The 3 judges looked at each other, unsure how to proceed. The crystal judge applied logic. The law said killing was wrong, so the Void Fleet was guilty. The machine judge processed data. The Void Fleet had indeed destroyed life, so they were criminals. The energy being judge considered abstracts. Life and death were physical concepts that were hard to understand. But none of them could see the bigger picture. The trial dragged on for days. The judges argued among themselves, each applying their species perspective to the case. The crystal judge wanted harsh punishment for breaking the law. The machine judge calculated that deterrent sentences would prevent future incidents. The energy being judge thought the whole concept of physical punishment was meaningless. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, tensions were rising. Species that had been friends for decades were taking sides based on their own biology. The plant-like species supported the populated worlds. The predator species understood the Void Fleet's need to survive. The collective minds worried about the precedent of individual needs overriding group welfare. On the 5th day of the trial, Tae-jin could not stand it anymore. He had watched the judges miss obvious questions and failed to dig deeper into the facts. He had seen species turning against each other as their natural biases took over. He remembered Judge Hyunwoo asking simple questions that revealed hidden truths. He thought about Captain Minho finding solutions that satisfied everyone's real needs. During a break in the proceedings, Tae-jin approached Counselor Woo-jin. "Sir," he said nervously, "I would like to invoke the emergency judicial provision." Woo-jin looked surprised. "Young man, you are not qualified to be a judge, you are just a clerk. The emergency provision states that any human citizen can serve as acting judge if no qualified judges are available, and the case threatens galactic stability," Tae-jin replied. He had spent hours studying the law books the night before. "That provision has never been used," Woo-jin protested. "Because it has never been needed," Tae-jin said firmly. "But it exists for exactly this situation." Woo-jin studied the young man's face. "You understand that if you fail, the consequences could be catastrophic? Species are already choosing sides. If this trial ends badly, we could see the return of the Great Stagnation." Tae-jin thought about the destroyed star system, the arguing, judges, and the knowledge Jin-ho had shared with him. He thought about the weight of responsibility that every human judge carried. "I understand," he said, "but I also understand what happens if we do nothing. The 3 judges cannot agree on anything except their own biases. This case will either drag on forever or end with a decision that satisfies no one." Woo-jin was quiet for a long moment. "Very well," he said finally. "But remember, you are not just representing yourself. You are representing the entire principle of human judicial authority. If you fail, it may be generations before other species trust human judgment again." That afternoon, Tae-jin walked into the council chambers wearing the black robes of a judge. He felt the weight of thousands of alien eyes watching him, waiting to see if a young, inexperienced human could succeed where 3 experienced alien judges had failed. As he sat down behind the judge's desk, Tae-jin realized that this was not just a trial about the Void Fleet. Tae-jin sat behind the judge's desk, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone in the chamber could hear it. The black robes felt heavy on his shoulders, and the carved wooden gavel in his hand seemed to weigh as much as a planet. Around him, thousands of alien delegates watched in silence. Some looked curious, others skeptical. A few seemed openly hostile. He was the youngest person ever to serve as a council judge, and everyone knew it. "The trial will continue," Tae-jin said, surprised at how steady his voice sounded. "I would like to review the evidence from the beginning." For the next 2 hours, he listened to both sides present their cases again. The prosecution painted the Void Fleet as monsters who had committed the worst crime imaginable. The defense argued that survival was not a crime, even when it came at a terrible cost. But Tae-jin noticed something the other judges had missed. Both sides were telling the truth, but neither was telling the whole truth. "I have some questions," he announced when the presentations were finished. He turned to the Void Fleet representative. "You said you searched for uninhabited systems but found none in time. How long did you search?" 3 months, the massive being replied. "And how often does your fleet need to feed?" "Every 6 months, or our young begin to die." Tae-jin nodded. "So you were already in emergency conditions when you began searching?" "Yes. And in a normal situation, how long does it take to find suitable feeding grounds?" The Void Fleet being was quiet for a moment. "In the past, it took no more than 2 weeks. There were always empty systems available, but not this time." "Why?" "We do not know. The sectors that were once empty now contained settled worlds or protected areas." Tae-jin turned to the prosecution. "I would like to see a map of the region where the Void Fleet was searching." The prosecutor seemed confused by the request but complied. A holographic map appeared in the center of the chamber, showing star systems in a vast area of space. Tae-jin studied the map carefully. "This map shows the current status of these systems. I would like to see what this region looked like 50 years ago. The map changed and a murmur went through the chamber. 50 years ago, the region had been mostly empty space with a few scattered outposts. Now show me 25 years ago, Taijin requested. The map changed again. More systems were settled. Now, but there were still empty areas. And 10 years ago? This time the change was dramatic. Nearly every system in the region now showed signs of settlement or protection status. Finally, show me the current map again. When the current map appeared, the pattern was clear. The entire region had been developed, leaving no empty systems for the Void Fleet to consume. So the Void Fleet was not being deliberately destructive, Taijin said thoughtfully. They were simply following their normal feeding patterns in an area that had changed completely. He turned to the council delegates. Who authorized the development of this region? Councillor Wu Jin stood up reluctantly. The Regional Development Committee approved settlement expansion in that sector. It was considered prime territory for colonization. And was the Void Fleet consulted about this expansion? They are a nomadic species, Wu Jin replied. They do not participate in territorial planning. I see, Taijin said. So we settled their traditional feeding grounds without telling them, then called them criminals when they tried to feed. An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. Several delegates shifted nervously in their seats, but Taijin was not finished. Now I have questions for the Void Fleet. When you discovered that your feeding grounds had been settled, did you attempt to contact the Council for assistance? No, the Void Fleet representative admitted. Why not? It has never been necessary before. We feed where we need to feed. Other species avoid us. But this time was different. You knew there were populated worlds in the area. Did you consider that consuming them would be seen as an act of war? The massive being was quiet for a long time. We were desperate. Our children were dying. We thought only of survival. I understand, Taijin said gently. But you killed 3 billion people. How do you justify that? We cannot, the Void Fleet being said, its voice heavy with something that might have been sadness. We killed them to save our own. We are guilty of this choice. Taijin sat back in his chair thinking. Around him the chamber was completely silent. Even the translators seemed to be holding their breath. He thought about what Judge Hyunwoo had done with the crystal and energy beings, looking past the obvious conflict to find the real problem. He thought about Captain Minho creating complex solutions that addressed everyone's actual needs. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke. This case is not really about the Void Fleet committing murder, he said. It is about a system that failed everyone involved. He stood up and walked to the center of the chamber, just as Captain Minho had done over a century ago. Canine. Fleet is guilty of destroying 3 populated worlds and killing billions of people. This is a fact, and it cannot be ignored or excused. The prosecution nodded approvingly, while the Void Fleet representative hung its massive head in acknowledgement. However, Taijin continued, the Council is also guilty. We are guilty of expanding into Void Fleet feeding grounds without consultation. We are guilty of not establishing protocols for species whose survival depends on resources we might want to protect. We are guilty of creating a situation where a desperate species had no choice but to commit atrocities. Now the delegates were murmuring among themselves, some angrily. But guilt is not the same as justice, Taijin said, raising his voice. Justice means understanding what really happened and making sure it never happens again. He turned to address the entire chamber. The Void Fleet committed a terrible crime, but they did it to save their children from starvation. The Council committed a terrible oversight, but we did it while trying to provide homes for growing populations. Both sides acted according to their nature and their needs. Both sides caused harm they did not intend. So what is your judgment? Called out the crystal delegate. Taijin took a deep breath. The Void Fleet will face consequences for their actions. They will surrender their largest ships to be converted into memorial monuments for the victims. They will provide 10 years of labor to help rebuild the infrastructure they destroyed. And they will accept permanent monitoring to ensure they never again feed in populated areas. The prosecution looked disappointed but not outraged. The punishment was significant but not vengeful. However, Taejin continued, the Council will also face consequences. We will establish the Nomadic Species Protection Protocol, ensuring that traditional feeding grounds and migration routes are legally protected. We will create early warning systems so that species like the Void Fleet can request assistance before reaching starvation levels. And we will provide emergency food reserves for any species facing survival crises. He paused, looking around the chamber. Finally, we will establish restorative justice programs. The Void Fleet will work with the families of their victims to understand the full impact of their actions. The Council will work with nomadic species to understand their needs better. Both sides will learn from this tragedy. The chamber was quiet as delegates considered this complex judgment. It was not the simple punishment many had wanted, but it addressed the real problems that had caused the crisis. Then, something unexpected happened. The Void Fleet representative spoke up. This judgment is fair, it said in its voice like dying stars. We accept these consequences. We are grateful that the judge saw our desperation as well as our crime. One by one, other delegates began to nod in agreement. Even species that had been calling for harsh punishment seemed satisfied with the decision. As the formal proceedings ended, Taejin sat back down behind the judge's desk, suddenly exhausted. He had done it. He had found a solution that acknowledged everyone's perspective while addressing the real problems. But as the chamber began to empty, Counselor Woo Jin approached the bench with a strange expression on his face. Judge Taejin, he said formally, I have a confession to make. Taejin looked up, puzzled. The illness affecting the human judges was not natural, Woo Jin admitted. It was artificially induced by a faction within the council who believed that human judicial authority was no longer necessary. Taejin felt a chill. You were testing whether the system could work without humans. Yes, Woo Jin said. Some species have grown resentful of human authority over the centuries. They wanted to prove that they could handle justice themselves. And now? Woo Jin smiled sadly. After watching 3 experienced alien judges fail where you succeeded, I think we have our answer. The faction that opposed human judges has been exposed and will face their own trial. He paused, looking at the young man who had just proved the value of human judgment. The medical team will now be able to cure Judge Kyung-soo and the others. It seems their illness will respond to treatment now that it has served its purpose. As Woo Jin walked away, Jin-ho appeared at Taejin's side. You did well, the old man said quietly. You proved something important today. What did I prove? Taejin asked. That being human is not about being perfect, Jin-ho replied. It is about being able to see past your own perspective to understand others. It is about admitting when you are wrong and finding ways to make things right.